Today, I am pleased and honored to welcome Captain Paul Watson back to the show. If you have not been paying careful attention to Paul's activities since the Whale Wars series, well, a lot has transpired since then because, as you know, Paul personifies action. Paul Watson really needs no introduction, so I will just say he is the founder of the Captain Paul Watson Foundation, and he has a new book out titled Hitman for Kindness Club, High Seas, Escapades, and Heroic Adventures of an Eco-Activist. Welcome, Captain Watson.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Paul, can you please give listeners a brief update on your new foundation just to get them oriented? And maybe a bit later, we'll go deeper into current activities and how people can get engaged.
I established the Captain Paul Watson Foundation a year ago after leaving Sea Shepherd, which I had established in 1977 and ran for 45 years. And since then, we've got our first ship. We're working on our second ship. We had our first campaign to Iceland to protect whales. That was followed by a campaign to the Faroe Islands to intervene against the killing of pilot whales and dolphins there. And we're heading out in November to oppose super trawlers off the coast of France and Ireland, and then back to our Iceland again next June.
Referencing some of the interesting things in the book, you had a very interesting childhood. You were a pretty tough kid, and then as a young adult, you really traveled the world early. Why is that? What is it about you that provides that energy?
Well, I was raised in a very small fishing village in eastern Canada. And when I was 10 years old, I actually spent the summer swimming with a family of beavers. Got to know one little beaver quite well, every day swimming with him. And then the next summer when I went back, I found all the beavers had been killed by trappers that winter. That made me quite angry. So I spent that winter following the trap lines, releasing animals and destroying the traps. And I guess I've been doing the same thing ever since. But, I was the eldest of 6 children with a single mother, and she died when I was 13. And so I ended up running off to sea when I was 16, spent some time with the Norwegian, Swedish Merchant Marine, and then the Canadian Coast Guard. And then I was a co-founder of Greenpeace in 72.
Yeah. How and why did you become interested in protecting harp seals from the yearly brutal slaughter?
Well, I was certainly aware of the killing of harp seals because it was not very far from where I was living in New Brunswick that this took place. And as an 8-year-old, I actually was witness to a seal hunt off when the seals came ashore on the ice off of a place called Shediac in New Brunswick. And so that was my first exposure to them. I saw them clubbing the seals, and that stayed with me when in 1975, and then I organized the first campaign for Greenpeace to go and intervene against the killing of seals, and then did that again. And eventually we ended up shutting down the market. It took until 2008. But even though now today the actual quota the Canadian government sets is 400,000 seals, it's the largest quota for any marine mammal. But they only killed last year 27,000 because there's no market. The hunt continues because of a $20 million subsidy by the Canadian government. It's basically just a glorified welfare program. But we did a lot of successes over the years. First of all, we stopped the whitecoat hunt. That's where they killed the newborns. And then they went after them at 5 or 6 weeks. It's not a real big difference, but, it was an achievement. But it took us 30 years to really destroy the market for seal pelts, but it was successful. But coming back in 1976 from the SEAL campaign, I stopped briefly in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and visited a woman named Ida Fleming because she had set up a group called the Kindness Club when I was a child. And she was the wife of the conservative premier or the governor of New Brunswick. And so I dropped by to see her. She remembered who I was, and that's when she called me after coming back from the SEAL campaign. She called me the hitman for the Kindness Club.
Thank you for explaining that title of the book, which didn't make sense to me until I read the book. So, and I hope that we could talk a little bit about kindness shortly. But first, talk about drift nets, what they are, how harmful they are, because you've destroyed a few in your days.
Well, there is no drift netting anymore, thankfully. After a number of campaigns, it was outlawed by the United Nations, but we did confiscate literally hundreds of miles of these things. They're almost like spider webs in the ocean. They go down to 26 feet. They can be 100 miles long, one net, and they just pretty much ensnare anything in their path. So that the bycatch, that is the unattended target animals, are enormous, everything from seabirds to unwanted commercial fish and that. So and then now today what we have to tend with is 100-mile long lines, 100-mile long gill nets. We pulled one gill net up on the Southern Ocean. It was 2 kilometers deep. Took us 110 hours to pull it up because it was 72 kilometers long and weighed 70 tons.
Yeah. And
this is the kind of gear that we're using. Here's the problem, is as fish populations become more diminished, they have to have more and more sophisticated technology, a lot of industrialized, mechanized fishing operations to go after the fewer and fewer numbers. And that means they have to borrow incredible amounts of money from the banks in order to finance this technology, which means they have to catch even more fish to pay off the banks. It's pretty much the economics of extinction, really. I mean, today, a super trawler, that's a $200 million ship. And that's just one ship. Yeah. And so you got to catch an awful lot of fish to pay off the bank loans for those that kind of equipment.
Are the long lines and the gill nets still legal?
Yes, they are. They're at any given moment, there's about 60,000 miles of gill nets and long lines being sent.
People talk about overfishing versus fishing. We are vegan-oriented, universal animal activists, so it's all bad for our perspective.
Well, there is no such thing as sustainable fishing. It doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
All fishing is bad. Now, the fishing industry will say, well, 2 billion people depend upon fish for their livelihood. And that may be true, but that's not what these guys are going after. They're going after the European, American, Australian markets, the Japanese markets. They're going after fish which is being sold for a lot of money. One bluefin tuna now is worth $75,000, in the Japanese market. And the Chilean sea bass, which isn't from Chile, and it's not a bass, is actually the Antarctic toothfish, but is sold as Chilean sea bass. This is a fish that's caught in the Southern Oceans, frozen, brought back to port, put on planes, sent off to New York and Paris and London to fancy restaurants. This is not what you call sustainable fishing. But the fishing industry would like everybody to believe that it's a bunch of little fishermen going out there and catching a few fish, when in fact it's giant super trawlers and incredibly mechanized, industrialized operations. In 2015, when I addressed the COP21 conference in Paris, the climate change conference, I said, if we really want to address climate change, then we need a moratorium of at least 75 to 100 years on all heavy gear commercial fishing operations. Because if we overfish the ocean, if the fish disappear, the ocean dies. And if the ocean dies, so do we. We don't live on this planet with a dead ocean. Now, since 1950, there's been a 40% diminishment in phytoplankton populations in the sea. These are small aquatic plants, but they provide up to 70% of the oxygen in the air we breathe and sequesters enormous amounts of CO2. And the reason that phytoplankton is being diminished is because we're destroying the seabirds and the whales and everything, all those other species that provide the nutrients to the phytoplankton, the magnesium, the iron, and the nitrogen that comes from the feces of these animals. One blue whale every day dumps 3 tons of manure into the surface, heavily rich in the nutrients required by phytoplankton. So we've been messing around with ecological systems that we don't even really understand. And the reality is this: phytoplankton, if that group of aquatic species disappears, the ocean dies. And most life on the planet dies with it. It is a foundation not only for controlling oxygen and sequestering CO2. It's the foundation of all of the food pyramid in the ocean. It feeds the krill. The krill feeds the fish and goes on all the way up to the top.
Recently, our good friend Bob Barker passed away. Do you have any personal recollections you'd like to share with the listeners?
Well, back in 2009, a woman got in touch with me. And she said, there's somebody who really wants to meet you and support you. And I said, okay. And I went to where she told me where to go to meet him. And I went there, and it was the office of Bob Barker's agent, and he was there. and which I was quite surprised. And he said, well, what do you need to stop the Japanese whaling fleet? I said, well, we could use another ship and a helicopter. And he said, well, will $5 million cover that? And I said, absolutely. And he said, I'll throw another $250 for the helicopter. So we got the ship and we named it Bob Barker. Actually, he didn't want me to name the ship after him.
Really?
I had to convince him that, it'd be inspiring to other people. And because of that, actually, Sam Simon, the creator of The Simpsons, he came along later and he sponsored the ship, but because of the Bob Barker. So Bob really didn't want his name out there, that he had donated it, but then he realized, or we convinced him that there would be an advantage to it. And I think he was really quite proud of it. We had a model of the ship made and given to him. And it was good.
We are speaking with Captain Paul Watson, founder of the Captain Paul Watson Foundation. For those who don't know, can you please explain what the Southern Ocean campaigns were and why did you undertake them?
In 1986, a global moratorium came out on all commercial whaling. It was all to be shut down. But Japan, Norway, and Iceland just ignored that ruling and continued to kill whales. But Japan did it under the guise of scientific research. They said, well, this is not commercial. We're doing research. So we first went down in 2002, then 2005, and every year up until 2017. Our objective was to block their operations to prevent them from killing whales. And during that time, we stopped them from killing 6,500 whales. We cut their quotas by 30%, then 40%, then finally to 90%. We cost them millions of dollars. And finally, it all got into court in the International Court of Justice in The Hague in 2014. And the International Court of Justice ruled that, look, this scientific research whaling is bogus and it's illegal. And Japan said, okay, then we'll recognize that. And they stopped whaling in 2015. But then in 2016, they started it all over again and completely ignored the ruling of the International Court of Justice. So they were killing whales in an established whale sanctuary, the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary, in violation of the global moratorium. So we took what I call aggressive nonviolent action. That is, we're going to block them. We're going to prevent them from refueling. And of course, that ended up with a lot of, ships ramming each other and all sorts of problems at sea. But in the end, it was successful. In 2018, they left the Southern Ocean, and they might go back, and we'll be prepared if they do. But right now, there is no whaling in international waters. Now, since 1977, we shut down pretty much 90% of the world's whaling operations. And since I began, countries like Australia and Chile and South Africa and Peru and numerous other countries, Spain, all stopped their whaling operations. We're restricting it now to only Norway, Iceland, Japan, and Denmark. And so we're going to continue. Right now, our focus is on stopping the whaling operations in Finland, where they're targeting endangered fin whales illegally. And, in 1986, I spent half their fleet, but they have still two ships left, and we're going to try and stop them next year.
If people want to get an update on that, your podcast, which you do with a chap named Charlie, describes that very nicely. I recommend people subscribe to that also. And in the book, the description, the writing of how Operation Zero Tolerance, which was one of these campaigns, went down was so compelling. I just want to congratulate you on just a thrilling read there. So,
thank you.
Really wonderful. The television production that tracked these campaigns, or most of them, how valuable was that to your efforts?
I think that was extremely valuable. In 2006, I approached all the networks I could and said, look, the biggest show on Discovery right now is a bunch of men going into a cold, remote area to catch crabs. And I said, I'll give you men and women going to a colder, more remote area to save whales. It has to be more compelling than catching crabs every day. And Animal Planet, Discovery and Animal Planet went for that idea, and we began the Whale War series, which lasted for 9 years, and it was the number one show on their series, but it reached millions and millions of people. And, certainly the Japanese were not very happy about it.
Yeah. It's quite memorable. Some of our listeners may be too young to have seen it when it was fresh, but you can still find those, right?
And Japan was actually invited to, their side of the story. They were invited to give their side of the story, but they refused.
You've cultivated and enjoyed some really wonderful, deep associations with some really talented people along the way. But you also describe a lot of betrayal, folks who really betrayed you and stabbed you in the back. You just keep on moving forward. So how do you do that?
Well, I've discovered something that as an organization gets bigger, it tends to attract people whose primary concerns are not the cause, and fundraisers, lawyers, accountants, people like that. And before you know it, it's not uncommon for the founders of organizations to be forced out of their own organization. Happened with David Brower with the Sierra Club, and Dave Foreman with Earth First, and Rick O'Barry with the Dolphin Project. It's unfortunate. We spend too much time doing the activism and not much time watching our backs.
We have been very curious to get your thoughts on offshore wind farms' role in harming whales. Do you think, is the construction and operation of wind farms harming and killing whales? And if so, what would you like to see done?
It's absolutely killing whales, and that's why whales are dying on the eastern seaboard. It's not the actual windmills that are causing the problem. It's the construction of the windmills. That means the pile driving these gigantic support beams, concrete and steel beams into the ground, creating decibel levels up to 200 decibels. And that ruptures the eardrums of marine mammals, causes them to strand. And of course, they can't navigate, but like that. It's been a difficult process because going up against windmills is not exactly a popular thing, because people have been convinced that we need alternative energy and this is the way to go. And I don't have any problems putting windmills on land, but when they drive them these piles into the ground, they're killing whales. They're killing other sea life too. Now there is an alternative. They could do gravity sink, which is giant concrete boxes that are filled with, concrete and then sunk to the bottom, and they're stable. But that costs a lot more money. So they decided to take the cheaper thing, which is pile drive. Yeah. So they made a decision to kill whales in order to build windmills. And this is a problem all over the world. We're fighting it off the coast of France, off the eastern seaboard, off Australia. And it's becoming more and more of a problem. We're basically going to cover the coastlines of most countries with these windmills and cause a lot of damage in the process.
This discussion makes me wonder about the U.S. Navy's activities. I haven't heard much about them recently, and their sonar harming whales. What's going on there?
Well, what they use in testing, it's not just the U.S. Navy, it's other navies too, which is low-frequency sonar, which again ruptures the eardrums of marine mammals or of cetaceans. And it's an ongoing problem. And for a long time, anytime the U.S. Navy was doing tests and then whales were washed up on nearby beaches, nobody was allowed to touch them. But a few years ago, they washed up in the Azores, and the U.S. had no authority there. And so biologists were able to get in there and determine that the cause of the death was ruptured eardrums.
Okay, so there is a relatively new organization, the Captain Paul Watson Foundation. Please describe.
I set up the Captain Paul Watson Foundation to carry on the legacy that I had created over the last 45 years. And the reason I named it after myself is that the other two organizations that I co-created and created were taken away. Now, it's pretty hard to take away an organization that's your own name. So that was my reasoning to use my own name for that. So we're now established in many countries: Germany, Spain, Italy, Australia, New Zealand. Sea Shepherd UK became the Captain Paul Watson Foundation UK, but we continue to work with Sea Shepherd France and Sea Shepherd Brazil, Sea Shepherd Hungary, that were loyal to that original cause. So that's the problem, is that I created a movement, and I wasn't very careful to see that people had other motives, and that was, and four people who I have trained and put in the position they were in over the last 20 years. A year ago, they voted me off of the global board without a meeting or a discussion, and I wasn't even allowed to vote. And then a few months later, they voted Lamy Essam Lamy, the president of Sea Shepherd France, off because she disagreed with their decision, and also she was asking questions they didn't want to answer. And one of those questions is, why is Sea Shepherd Australia, which is part of Global, why are they in an official partnership with Austral Fisheries Corporation and the Marua Daichiro Fisheries Corporation, now they're so-called supporting sustainable fishing, but there is no sustainable fishing. And the reason behind this is that the CEO of Austral Fisheries got Sea Shepherd Australia tax status in Australia. And because he pulled strings with the Liberal Party there and got him the tax status. And in return, Sea Shepherd Australia is supporting so-called sustainable fishing. And not just any fishery, but the toothfish fishery, which is an endangered species. And recently, the Australian government expanded the marine preserve around Macquarie Island National Park, south of Australia. And environmental groups, of course, were very much for that. But Austral Fisheries led the campaign to oppose that. And Sea Shepherd Australia was noticeably silent about the whole thing. They didn't say a thing about it.
Did you say earlier you have one ship now and another on the way?
We do have one ship. It's the John Paul de Joria, which was purchased thanks to my longtime friend and supporter, John Paul de Joria.
Yep.
And we're looking at a second ship. And we also have a ship with Sea Shepherd France and two vessels with Sea Shepherd UK, which is now the Captain Paul Watson Foundation. And also a vessel that we're getting for the Amazon to protect the river dolphin here. So a lot of people came over with me, especially a lot of veteran crew members and supporters. And so, at least we have a bit of an advantage in starting up again, more so than I did in 77 when I started up Sea Shepherd.
Yeah. So there's this thing that you've called Neptune's Pirates. Who or what are they?
Well, that's what we operated under. This summer, we operated under Neptune's Navy, which is something I created back in 1985. But then in the midst of the campaign, Sea Shepherd claimed that was they had the rights to that name because I was with Sea Shepherd when I created it. So I said, okay, well, let's just call it Neptune's Pirates because I know that's the one thing that they will not copy because they're deathly afraid of being called pirates. And, the Jolly Roger flag that I designed, which they won't let me use, they don't fly it from their ships. They just use it on merchandise. So the one thing I knew they couldn't try and take over was the name Pirates. And I don't have any problem with it, really, because, I'm actually a bona fide, officially, I'm a pirate, because the Ninth Circuit District Court of the United States, Judge Alex Kaczynski, back in 2014, labeled me a pirate. He officially called me a pirate, didn't charge me with anything. But I do have, a federal court officially calling me a pirate. So I think I'm probably the only official pirate on the planet today.
Yeah. Speaking of which, are you able to freely travel internationally these days, or are there countries that you got to stay away from?
Well, in 2012, I was put on the Interpol Red Notice, first by Costa Rica for interfering with a shark finning operation off of Guatemala at the request of the Guatemalan government. In 2017, with a change of government in Costa Rica, that was dropped, and I'm no longer on Costa Rica's Red Notice. But Japan has me on there for conspiracy to trespass on a whaling ship, an illegal whaling ship. But the Interpol Red Notice is for major drug traffickers, serial killers, and war criminals. I'm the only person in the history of Interpol to be on that list for trespassing on a whaling ship. So I'm free to enter the U.S. I'm free to enter France and Ireland, but any other country could detain me and extradite me to Japan because of that Red Notice. At some point, what I intend to do is go to Interpol's headquarters in Lyon and just confront them on the whole thing.
So for people who want to get engaged and learn more about the foundation and support you, what are the best ways to do it? How do they find you?
You can find us on the social networks and also the Captain Paul Watson Foundation website. And I also have my own Facebook, Twitter, and everything under my name, Paul Watson, or Captain Paul Watson Foundation UK, or just look up Captain Paul Watson Foundation or Paul Watson Foundation.
And so the book is Captain Paul Watson, Hitman for the Kindness Club, High Seas Escapades and Heroic Adventures of an Eco-Activist, which you certainly are. Final question, Paul, why is it important to be kind, even in a pretty tough business you operate in?
Well, my mother taught me that we have to be kind to animals. And, it was a lesson that was instilled into me and also reinforced by Ida Fleming with her Kindness Club and everything. We have to be able to live on this planet in harmony with all other species. We have to get rid of this idea that we're dominant, that we're superior, that we're better than all other species. So, we have to learn to live in harmony. I also set up the Church of Biocentrism. It's not really a church, it's more of a science-based thing. But what it's trying to promote is that we have to have a biocentric point of view instead of an anthropocentric view. All the major world religions are based on that we're the center of everything. Everything was created for us. We're better than everything. So biocentrism is more based on indigenous people's understanding that we're interdependent with all other species, that we're not more important than any of them. In fact, many species are far more important than we are. A few years ago, I got a call from Brett Hume of Fox Network, and he said, "Did you say at a lecture that bees, trees, worms, and whales are more important than people?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I did say that." And he said, "Well, that's outrageous. How could you say something so outrageous?" And I said, "Well, because they're more important than people, because a very simple reason. They can live here without us, but we can't live here without them. We don't live in a world without bees, trees, whales, and fish." And so that's a hard thing to get across to the anthropocentric mind, that, just how important all these other species are. And we don't live on this planet by ourselves. I always like to look at it this way. If you look at the Earth as a spaceship, which is what it is, this incredible voyage around the Milky Way, and every spaceship has a life support system. And that life support system gives us everything that we need. It regulates climate and temperature, provides food, and also gives us the air that we breathe. And that life support system is run by a crew of engineers that keep it all running, keeping that machinery going. We humans, we're not crew members, we're not engineers, we're passengers, and we're having a wonderful time amusing ourselves. But what we are doing is we're murdering the crew. We're killing off the crew. And there's only so many crew members, so many engineers you can kill before that machinery begins to fall apart. And when it does, we go with it too, because we're just the passengers and we go down with the ship.
Captain Paul Watson, thank you very much for joining us on Animals Today.
Oh, thank you.